Hi, and welcome to another one of my Taking Control series. Today, I have got the really lovely Becky, who is also known as Defining Mum on Instagram and Facebook. But Becky has three gorgeous girls through donor conception, and she's really kindly come along to speak to me today just to help you get some ideas for how you can take control if donor conception is something you're looking into. So this series is to give you lots of different ways wherever you are on your fertility journey to help you take control of different aspects. As we both know, taking control is something that feels really important when you're struggling to conceive, because so much else feels like it's taken away from you. So hopefully this series is helping with some of that. So Becky, thank you, and hi.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, and such an important series, because I think that is one of the most difficult things when it comes to the fertility journey. It's the loss of control and trying to work out where you can potentially take some control, and then but also understand the areas where you can't and how you can then deal with that as well. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you. I really appreciate your time and your advice and expertise on this, because you've been through it yourself. So you've got firsthand experience to be able to help us, but also now that you're helping people on their journey through donor conception as well, which we'll come on to, you're perfectly positioned to chat to us about it. So just to get us started, basically, do you want to talk through kind of the process, what you went through, what your fertility journey was like, and kind of some of the process of donor conception from a logistical point of view in terms of what the physical process was like, but also the emotional side and some of the things that you went through while you were going through that, and some of the decisions and things that you had to make?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I've got vast experience in fertility treatment, given we went through 5 cycles of own egg IVF before we moved to donor conception. So I almost feel I'm qualified in that sense to talk about the kind of the feelings that you can go through, and kind of draw it back to my own experience. And I suppose firstly, just want to talk a little bit around how, when you are trying to process the idea of donor conception, things can feel very much out of your control. But also there are some decisions that are in your control that can be really difficult to make. And so, yeah, I think just going through, I mean, we went quite quickly into IVF given my diagnosis of premature ovarian failure, and we were told we got to do it straight away. So I think I, like most people, started that journey feeling quite naive. Didn't really think about control, and just went into it trusting everything that I was told, and would just kind of go along with it. And it was only throughout the cycles that I started to feel that real loss of control when it didn't work. And I was then trying to pinpoint, well, what have I done wrong? What can I do to make it work? And that was at the point where I started to ask a lot more questions, and I realized that I was my own advocate. I had to be the one that was pushing these things. And if I wasn't comfortable and didn't have an answer, then no one else was going to ask that for me. And I became probably a little bit of a pest, but that's the only way I could feel like I was doing something, was by understanding exactly what treatment they were putting me on and understanding why. And if I'd heard of another option, asking them why was I not on that particular protocol, or just really just trying to work out where I could take that control and try and get the best possible outcome. And what I then found during each kind of failed cycle was that grief would hit, and then I would instantly go into planning mode. So I didn't let myself grieve. I was right, okay, what can I do next? And I have so many people messaging me almost a day or two after a negative result saying, oh, I think I need to think about donor conception now. What do I do next? And it's that feeling that, right, okay, what can I control? This hasn't worked, but I still want to get to that end goal. And we're just so tunnel visioned, and quite often don't let us step back and think about, okay, that isn't my fault, the reason that's not worked. It wasn't going to work, and now I've got to think about and take some time out for me. And I think that's one of the most difficult things when you want to control and move on to the next stage, because you're just so desperate for that baby.
Yeah, and I think because I know you'll probably feel the same, especially with going through so many cycles. You measure time in months, and every month is another month where you haven't had a baby. And I think the thought of waiting for another cycle of IVF, it's almost like, how soon can I get going? And I was very much the same. I felt a bit like, well, I need to get going, and at least if I get going with the next cycle, then I'm on with my next chance, and I don't want to wait. Why would I want to wait? And yeah, it's really important to take that time out for yourself and have a think about things first, isn't it? But some people kind of cope by moving on to the next. I'm very much the same. I like a plan, and I want to get moving with things, but make sure you're making that time to grieve. And yeah, the guilt thing is a big thing, but it's not your fault. You know, there's nothing you can do to kind of help in some respects. So there's nothing you can have done that has caused it to happen. So no, it's a really important point for people to remember, that there shouldn't be any guilt there, and people kind of cope in different ways.
Yeah, and I think a good example of people coping in different ways was the difference between me and my husband. Like, I was very much emotionally driven, right, what can we do next? And he was much more of the opinion he wanted to take a step back and do a bit more research, and that drove me crazy because I can't just sit here. And I remember particularly, I know what you said about having to wait for that next cycle, and I remember after I miscarried on the first round of IVF, I was told I'd got to wait 2 cycles. I'd got to have a period and then wait another cycle. And the thought of that was just crushing. I couldn't. And it was in that time where we weren't ready to accept donor eggs as an option, particularly because I'd just got pregnant with my own eggs. But I, being myself and wanting to take some control, saw that there was a donor conception information evening at our local clinic. And this was 1 week after I'd miscarried. And yet I needed to feel like I was doing something. So I dragged Matt along and we went, and it was probably one of the worst things we could have done at that time, because we weren't ready to accept that that might be a path for us. And it almost sent us the other way. But then it was over the following year of another 4 cycles that didn't work. We slowly kind of worked towards that realization that donor eggs was going to be our best option. But one of the things I really struggled with, I almost wanted the control of that decision to be taken from me. I wanted the doctor to say to me, and I asked him on quite a few occasions, I wanted him to say that it's not going to work with your eggs.
Yeah.
This is the next step. But they would always sit on the fence and kind of say, well, these are your percentage chances. It's not impossible with your eggs, but you'd have a better chance. And it was that where I almost just wanted them to tell me, move on.
Make the decision for you.
Yeah. So as much as sometimes I think we want more control, sometimes we want to be guided a bit more on these decisions, and yet the doctor isn't there. We've got to be the ones, especially when it comes to something as big as donor conception, in terms of a decision. You've got to have gone through that process, and I think it's understanding that it is a process. It's not just going to happen overnight. You know, it's just going to have this light bulb moment where you suddenly go, let's go and do that. It's a process of grief, and one day you might feel really, really excited about, because there's that option, and it's the chance of finally having that family that you've dreamed of. And yet the next day you might totally be confused, because then you start then feeling really sad about the fact that your genetics aren't going to be passed on. And I was like this, up and down, and one day I'd think I was ready, the next day I'd think, oh no, I'm not, because I'm still grieving, or I'm still really upset about this, or I'd be worrying about what people would think. I'd be worrying about, would I bond with the baby? Would the baby somehow know that I'm not genetically related? And it's all of these different emotions and feelings, and it's really, really complex. And I think that's why it's so important for people on that journey of making that decision to realize that that's completely normal.
Yeah.
And that it's very hard to control those emotions. And my best advice would be for people to seek some counselling, because it is really, really complex. And I saw a counsellor, although they weren't a specific fertility counsellor, even so, they just helped me have that space to voice what was sitting inside that I couldn't speak to Matt about, or my mum, or anyone, because I just needed that safe space to talk about it. And that helped me feel more in control of my emotions and my decisions. And allowed me to kind of work out what was going on in my head at the time. And so, yeah, when we talk about control, it's different for everybody, especially when you're making this decision. But I think it's acknowledging where you can help yourself take that control. So whether it be through counselling or speaking to someone else who's been on that path, finding other stories you can relate to, because it was at that point where I found someone else, I really started to feel a bit more like I could visualise what that path might look like.
And someone else who's been,
someone else
who's been through it and completely understands, because it's almost another layer, I guess, from those that are struggling and going through IVF. It's another layer on top of that, and finding people who've experienced that aren't going to invalidate what you're feeling and almost just say, well, it gives you an extra chance of it working, or don't be worrying about that. You know, somebody who will validate what you're feeling. And definitely in terms of counselling, there's counsellors with all clinics who, if you are looking to go down the donor conception route, you would have sessions with those. And yeah, I think it's like you were saying, getting support from somebody is vital, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I kind of do what I do now with sharing my story through Defining Mum and sharing lots of other stories, because sometimes you just have to be able to see it to really visualize it, and to listen to other people. And I mean, I would even sit in the IVF in the fertility clinic waiting room when I was still going through my own eggs, and I'd be looking at other people and I'd feel jealous of people who are going through IVF, because and on the forums when they were saying, oh, I'd got 20 eggs or something, and I would feel this jealousy towards those people who were also going through a really difficult experience and with no guarantee of success. But you do almost feel another sense of isolation when you're going through that, and you may have to then take that, like you say, it's another level, to almost let go of that genetic connection, and you're not giving up, you're giving yourself the best chance. And I think that's the language that we use often is really important as well around that, around recognizing that you sometimes the strongest thing to do is to let go and think about something else as a different route and different path to parenthood.
Yeah, and that's it. I think it's about kind of defining what having a family is for you. And if it is about having a family, then what gives you the best chance of that? And it's not about deciding, like you say, to give up. It's finding what the best route is and the one that has the most chance of success for you. And it's great. Your account also talks about how you are a mum to children who were conceived through donor conception as well, so that those who are worrying about kind of the further side, you know, so once they've had success, what that's like as well. So it's great that you're covering that. What about things like research? You know, that another way people are able to take control is through research. Was that something that you felt really helped, being able to research different things?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot more out there now than there was back then. So if I'd have been going through it now, I think I would have been trawling the hashtags on Instagram and following those. But I suppose about 6 years ago when we were going through it, I just didn't really find that. I was kind of involved in the forums. I think it was NetMums forum and things like that, which is where I met a couple of people. But then when we started looking at donor eggs, we soon realised with our local clinic that, well, I'd been on the waiting list for 10 months, and then I would phone quite regularly. Any match yet? Am I any closer? This is while still going through the final kind of rounds with my own eggs. I was almost trying to line up that kind of next option ready, so I didn't have a huge waiting time. And we were just getting closer to the top. And I was told by one person it could be another 3 months, someone else said another 9 months, someone else said another year. And the uncertainty was so hard to deal with. And that's when I went into full-on research mode. And okay, where else could we go? It was actually on our honeymoon, of all places. We decided that we were going to stop putting things off. We were going to get married because we were engaged. And it was on our honeymoon where we started to really say, right, okay, we'll have one more go, but if that doesn't work, we'll look at donor eggs. And I started looking at options abroad, and I created this spreadsheet, this big spreadsheet of kind of what testing do they all do, what their success rates were, logistically, how could I get to them in flight times and ease, and then also things like the cost, waiting times. And I had this spreadsheet and I looked at clinics all over Europe. And then we got back and we held some Skype consultations, and it was more of a gut feel. We made the decision because, if I'm really honest, the success rates were very, very similar. The whole process of kind of what they test the donor for were pretty much identical. So there wasn't a lot in it. And then we decided on the Czech Republic because it just felt right for us, for a number of reasons. One thing I didn't do a lot of research around, and I didn't really know I would need to, is around the anonymity of the donor. So that is something I would always say to someone now, just really think about, allow yourself to think beyond having a baby, and think about in sort of 10, 15 years time, and you've got a teenager or someone and if they turn to you and say, I really want to know who this person is who shares half of my genetics, would you want to give them that option to find out? And actually nowadays there are options, because there's DNA testing and other ways of finding them, but I think it's quite a big thing, and it's not something I really gave a huge amount of thought to at the time. We were always very clear that we'd be open with donor conception, but there's a lot to think about, and it can feel like a real minefield, just knowing where to start, whether you use a known donor, an open ID at 18 donor, what does that mean for you? How do you feel about that? Because quite often the thought of the donor, especially at that stage, you can feel quite threatened by the thought of someone else having a link to your child. And I definitely harbored a lot of those fears. I would say now, kind of 5 years on, I feel a lot more comfortable now that the girls are getting older, and I feel really comfortable in our relationship, that I can't be replaced. But at the very beginning, it can be quite a difficult thing to get your head around. And so, yeah, I suppose talking about the donor as well, another thing I wanted to mention in terms of control is there are a lot of different options out there when it comes to matching with a donor. And that's part of the process where I felt very out of control at the time. And we unknowingly chose a clinic that actually would just match us based on my characteristics. So I really had no other input other than filling in the form, which, if I look back, was probably a really good thing for me, because I think I would have overanalyzed. But a lot of people will prefer to have more information. And yeah, sometimes now I think I wish I did know a bit more. But if you're looking through profiles and trying to weigh up different things and letters that donors have written, and looking at photos of them as a child, there's a lot of information to process there, and a lot of control for you to have. And it can feel quite overwhelming. And I've spoken to a lot of people who are just, I can't choose, I just don't know how to choose. And they often worry whether they'll regret a certain choice when it comes to a donor. And again, it's one of those situations where you're stuck in that situation where there's still so many unknowns ahead of you. And I always try and kind of pull people to say, well, look, if you've got that child in your arms and you've got there after all of this, I don't believe you would ever look at that child and think, oh, if I'd have chosen that other donor. You, by that stage, that moment that feels so huge at the time, that has passed, and now you've got this child. And yeah, it's not an easy process. It's not for the faint-hearted, but there's a lot of different points where control is a big element, and whether it be a lack of control or almost feeling like you've got too much control.
Yeah, and I suppose having a think about how much control you want to have within that maybe is part of the decision-making process. And when you're looking at different clinics, taking into account those that where they do give you that, choice, maybe if you don't want that might play into the decision making.
Absolutely. And I would definitely encourage people to think about that up front, because it isn't something I'd considered. And I know someone who has recently been to Russia, and they chose that particular country because of the level of information they could get about the donor, and it was important to them to have certain pieces of information. It doesn't mean the process in choosing was easy, but they wanted that. So yeah, I think it's speaking to other people about that route, but also being aware and just managing your own expectations as well. And we found throughout our process, things moved quite quickly, which was good for me because obviously I didn't like to sit and wait. But what I also found was I got to a point where I was saying to my clinic, well, when are you going to tell me about my donor match? And I was already kind of syncing my cycle with the donor. And they like to leave it till after egg collection because they want to make sure that that donor responds and they've got eggs, and they always have a backup donor, I think, being stimulated at the same time, just in case. And yeah, I really needed to know that was huge information for me. And I remember pushing with the clinic saying, look, can you tell me sooner than, I mean, it's enough trying to take the information around how many eggs have been collected, never mind who that person potentially is and whether or not they match me in any way. Because at the time, the physical resemblance and characteristic match was really important because it was the kind of the only connection I felt I had. And so they did give me that information a bit sooner, but I would always advise people to ask at the very beginning, your clinic, when will I find out that information? Because it is, I think sometimes clinics don't realize how important that is to us. And I know people who have been through that and have been really frustrated by the fact that they couldn't find out. And it's not that you're going to say, oh no, I don't want that donor, but it's information you need to stop processing. And I mean, we eventually found out about, I think it was about a week before egg collection. And basically she was me on paper. If you'd have kind of written down my characteristics and hers, we were born in the same year and everything. Yeah. So I then felt more comfortable, but that I definitely felt a real state of anxiety around, I don't even know whose eggs I'm having here. I don't even know anything about her.
You're putting a lot of trust in the clinic, aren't you, to match with somebody that's like you, and sort of having a bit more information puts your mind at ease. And yeah, it comes back to advocating for yourself and feeling that it's okay to be asking these questions. You know, sometimes we need extra information just for our own peace of mind and to reduce the amount of worry we have going into things. And if that's important to you, then it's, you know, okay to advocate for yourself. And did you get much support? I know you've spoken about like speaking to a counsellor. Did you have much support in terms of while you were trying to make some of these decisions, and then once you were at the clinic?
Not really, no. And that is one of the things when you go abroad, you don't get the mandatory counselling session that you would get over here. And that's something I think we missed, having something that was more dedicated to donor conception rather than just a general, how are you doing, a session of counselling. So yeah, I would always advise people to try and seek out some counselling, or just seek out some information. And like what I've created through Paths to Parent Hub is the ideal thing to be looking at while you're kind of in that waiting period or decision making, to allow you to hear different stories and to listen to some experts talk about certain things, and just to provoke some thoughts about the future. Because, and that's one of the things, a clinic can make it sound so simple when you're told you need to use a donor, like it's just another stage of treatment, like another, like, oh, why don't we try some donor eggs? And yet it's a decision that it forms your family story, and then it forms the start of your child's story, and it's a lifelong decision. And that's what I always try and help people to recognize. And it's not something I recognized at the time, I don't think. And because you've got to think about how you're going to talk to your child about this. And the difficulty is when we've been through so many rounds of fertility treatment, we're in this stage where we like to protect ourselves, and we don't like to hope too much, and we don't like to think too far ahead because we don't want to fall. And if I'd have probably allowed myself to think a little bit more about talking to a child who was a bit older and wanted to know a bit more, I'd have probably thought to myself, I might want to know a bit more about my donor than I'm actually getting here. And it may have influenced my decision. I don't know. I don't regret our decision because we wouldn't have our girls, but I do find myself sometimes hearing other people talk about what they know about their donor, or they've got a letter from their donor to give to the child. And I kind of wish I had more at times. And that's why I just try and encourage people to think about, some people might be really comfortable, and it might be the best thing not to have too much information, because it helps you kind of protect yourself and just focus on you as a family. But things do evolve, and I think feelings change over time, and I think it's just recognizing that is important sometimes.
And everybody's different, aren't they? And sort of having more information about the things it's worth considering is really important. I know I've spoken to people who've said they've basically had appointments with doctors who've said, right, no point trying with your own eggs, it's not going to work. And has been passed a leaflet for donor conception using donor eggs, donor sperm. And it's not enough information. Having somebody there, or knowing that actually you need to think about some of these things. Does your clinic offer counselling? How much anonymity do you want? How much information do you want to know about your donor? Have a think about all these things, and then you can make informed decisions, because it might be, actually, I don't want to know anything about them, and then that's something that you can choose, and you've made that conscious decision. And I know, sort of in terms of support, when I've spoken to people before, a big thing that they've said is that when they've been getting the support is more back-ended. So I know you'd said you kind of hadn't thought that far ahead, but people I've spoken to as well have said they don't actually want to, because they just can't get past the thought that it could work. And I know myself from going through IVF, it's very hard to imagine that at any point you will have a baby, and then thinking further down the line. So it's almost having that, making sure that the support is front-ended as well as back-ended, if that makes sense. So the support needs to be in making those decisions, coming to terms with needing to use donor eggs or donor sperm, helping you make those decisions and helping you come to terms with that, and the grief that might bring, and then the excitement that it might bring, knowing that actually there's still another option for you there, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just think it's that the support is so lacking, I think, in terms of what is needed. And also I think it's important to recognise that the decision might not be right for everybody. So I talk about it was the right decision for us, but for some people there may be a different path, or they may decide that it's never going to feel right. It's such a unique decision to make. And I think it's also realising that you have that control to say that. If your doctor's saying to you, next step is donor eggs, or next step is donor sperm, and after counselling and working through it, it doesn't feel right, you have that control to kind of make that decision. I think so often we talk about the kind of people going on and going down this path, but then I've spoken to people who have come to the conclusion that it isn't for them, and it just doesn't sit right with them. So yeah. And then I think that there's thinking about after you've had the transfer, if you go down the route, we've just been matched with the donor, we know a bit more about them, and you've kind of got to the point of, oh my goodness, the thought of I was having my first blastocyst ever transferred, the excitement that was there was just so great, but also it almost felt like the stakes were higher this time. So I'd become so used to almost expecting it not to work with my own eggs, that then suddenly I was flipped into a situation where there was a more chance of it working than not, with a 50-60% chance.
Yeah.
And I mean, we were really, really lucky because it worked first time for us. But I hear from a lot of people who have gone through into the decision to use a donor, have thought, great, we've removed that barrier. We know what the barrier was. It was my eggs or the sperm. And then it doesn't work. And it's suddenly even more crushing, because your expectations, and I think it's all about managing those expectations as well when it comes to donor conception. And you almost as well, there's not only that, it's the feeling that it might be your last option. You might not feel comfortable enough to go a step further to surrogacy or adoption. And for me, in my head, we hadn't processed anymore. It was like our last option. So I was terrified that if this didn't work, then what?
Yeah.
Whereas before I'd been, well, if this doesn't work, I'm coming to the terms with the fact that I can use donor eggs. And there was always a kind of a backup option there. With this, it just felt like the stakes were so high. And I mean, like I say, we were so lucky for it to work first time. And I've heard of people where it's worked second time, third time. And again, it's just knowing that it's nothing within your control. And that's the hardest thing. Once you've had that embryo transferred, you just have no control. And
yeah,
it's so hard.
It is. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, just leading up to that transfer as well, whereas previously, if you've been through cycles with your own eggs or previous IVF cycles, are so used to being so involved in it, and you're there at every scan, you're there, you know exactly what's going on, and suddenly you're not the one in the clinic and you're waiting for an email update or a phone call from someone who doesn't see the same urgency as you to know how things are progressing. And I remember feeling really distant and really kind of lost during that time, where I felt a bit of a spare part, and like, what's my role here? Like, Matt had given his sperm, and this unknown person was going through this process that I knew so well, and I would have given my right arm to be doing, because that's what I wanted to be doing. And I almost felt a little bit of envy in a way that she was able to do that thing that I couldn't. And that feeling of lost control was really real at that time. And then suddenly you're in for an embryo transfer, and it's like your first time back in a clinic after a while, and it's just very, very difficult on the emotion scale to manage.
I was going to say, but it's very up and down throughout that point, because it, as we said, that there's that extra level to it. It's already like that when you're going through a cycle of IVF, but sort of not being involved fully, not having all the information, or being the first person to find out that information as well. It sort of adds an extra thing to it. So, is there anything that you found helped you cope through that point then? I know you said about like advocating, really sort of pushing the clinic for more answers and more information. Is there anything else you found helped you?
I don't know, because we only went through the donor cycle once. I'd probably say there's a lot of things I would go back and kind of try and tell myself, rather than, I don't think I did it right at the time. I think I drove myself crazy. And I remember trying to sort of throw myself into work a bit, but that didn't work for me. I was really struggling with my mental health. I could have done with setting myself up with some more distractions. So my advice would be for someone to almost like in your 2-week wait, where we say plan some nice things every few days, do the same thing through that period of time, because maybe do a few things that you wouldn't have been able to do if you were going through stims. So have a glass of wine if you want to. And just it's just trying to take your mind off it, but also, like you said, around advocating for yourself, and don't feel apologetic for asking a question that's important to you. And I'm sure they get it all the time, but I know I've heard some people say, no, I've not wanted to ask because I don't want to bother them. And I think, well, it's so important to you, and it'll take 2 minutes of their time. And I just think a lot of it were things that I hadn't prepared myself for. I hadn't even thought, oh my gosh, I'm not going to know each follicle scan, how many follicles there are, or I'm not going to know when trigger injection is, or I'm not going to really know much at all. And that was almost the shock of that was quite difficult to deal with. So I think for people, if they're watching this now and they're kind of hearing about these things, it's just preparing them mentally for some of the feelings they may go through. I mean, they might quite enjoy the fact that they're not in it. Everyone's different. But I definitely found it really, really difficult. Really, really like I wanted to be doing more, but I couldn't. And I think I just probably needed to be a bit kinder to myself, and to kind of just plan some nice things and try and distract as much as possible, because there was nothing I could have been doing that was going to change any outcomes whatsoever.
It's just sort of looking after yourself in that point, isn't it, emotionally and physically? So we've talked a lot about kind of the before process, but I know from speaking to people, some of the concerns are around kind of how they'll feel afterwards, whether they'd feel differently about a child. Could you just talk us through about kind of how you coped with that? I know you'd sort of thought about some of those things beforehand, but is there anything that you'd say now, now that you've got your 3 gorgeous girls, how you feel about that side of things, and what people can do to take control on their kind of once they've had successful donor conception?
My biggest piece of advice would be to find your tribe, and like find that group of people who are maybe parenting now, or if you're going through pregnancy, if you can find some people, whether it be through Instagram, or we've got a lovely community on Path to Parenthood where people are really kind of connecting, and just find those people that truly understand, so that you can share those worries and not fear any judgment around them. And I had one lovely lady who I met through Netmorbans, who was like my lifeline, and she'd already got a little boy who was I think he was 3 at the time I had Mila, so he's 3 years older than Mila. And she was the one person I could text and say, God, I'm really worried that this sounds really shallow, but I'm just really worried what my baby's going to look like. Like, no one ever knows what their baby's going to look like, but you kind of know there'll be a combination of you and your husband. But in this situation, I just had these like weird visions of not recognizing my own child. And it seems so silly now, because as soon as I set eyes on her, she was Mila and she was herself. She wasn't half of one person, half of another. And I think it's just knowing that those worries and concerns that you're having, and it might be that you are parenting. I had a real wobble, actually, and I didn't realize I was going to have it when Mila started school. It's knowing that the feelings of grief will sometimes come back, and they'll hit you when you least expect it. And it was only when I was speaking to Julianne, who's a therapist, and I was sort of saying, I'm really struggling with the start of school, and I just feel like it hurts to let her go into the big wide world. And I'd been thinking about, what if they talk about families, and she's aware of how she was conceived, and if she then talks about mummy's eggs being broken, and that a lady gave us some eggs to make her and her sisters, whether she'd be met with a blank face. And it was losing control, because I then wasn't always going to be around her to protect her or to help her understand things. And I think sometimes it can just give you that extra layer of wanting to control everything as a parent, and not in a negative way, but I think you've been through so much to get there. It's recognizing that actually that can probably impact how you still feel every day, even if you've come to terms with everything and you've accepted, and you will be quite sensitive to things. You will feel very, very grateful. I'm sure for anybody who's been through a difficult journey to conceive, they all forget it. There's this heightened sense of gratitude, isn't there? And sort of pinch myself moments.
Yeah, definitely. But then it is, that worry is still there. And I think it's, I suppose you've gone through so much to get them that doesn't go away easily.
No. And I think it's also like, I'm very lucky to have had a very kind of straightforward life up until infertility hit. And it almost makes you think about things in a different way. You kind of realize that things can go wrong, and things might not always go as planned, and bad things happen. And I think it's made me a little bit more anxious about something bad happening, especially when you've kind of got there and you think, oh, right, we've got this family we've always wanted now, and I wouldn't change them for the world. And yet then you kind of start having more anxieties about, oh, well, what if something threatens that? I think it's just, maybe it's kind of a response to trauma as well, and part of that. But
protection thing.
And
you're very open, aren't you, with the girls? Because I know some people have said, well, would you want to tell them? People have very, very different views on this, but you are very open, aren't you? And how have you kind of approached that with them?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's another thing when we talk about control, is about the family story as well. And a lot of people are worried about kind of whose story is it? Is it their story, or is it our story? Who controls that narrative? And is it fair for us to go out there and start telling people when actually it should be them to tell the story? But the way I see it, and the way we've decided to talk about it, is that, it is our family story, yet it will become their story. And I believe that by telling them from an early age, and it being the only thing they've ever known, it's just going to feel normal for them. And also meeting other people who've got donor conceived children, so they don't feel like they're the only ones. Again, it helps them feel less alone. And I think by giving them a positive narrative, that we're really proud of where we got to, we wouldn't change where we've got to, and we wouldn't change how we came to have them, and we love them regardless, and they were so wanted, but also that they are allowed to ask questions, and we understand that it's quite complex, and it's all about the conversation adapting as they grow. So being age appropriate at the moment. So we talk about mummy's eggs being broken, and mummy being sad, and daddy being sad, but we saw a doctor, and a lady gave us some eggs, and it was a very kind thing for her to do, but we don't know that lady. and it's managing those expectations as well, and not building her up to be some kind of angel when we don't actually know this person. And if in the future they ever come to find out who she is through DNA testing, I just want to manage that expectation with them, that she did this knowing that she would be anonymous as well. So there may be a kind of, she might not want to be found, but we just don't know. And it's kind of emphasizing all the positives and how, like I say, how loved and wanted they are, and how special they are. And I'm so lucky to have 3 who are all from the same donor, the same batch of eggs, and so all created on the very same day, which I think is a lovely story as well. But I feel a lot of comfort in the fact that they've got each other as well to talk to. So yeah, I think we as parents, it feels like a huge decision on our shoulders around talking, who do we tell, who don't we tell, and our personal decision is to be as open as we can be. And I also want to encourage other people and to show people that they can be proud of this story and this path to parenthood, because quite often this route can be shrouded in shame, because we got there because my eggs didn't work. I felt like my body failed me, yet personally I did nothing wrong. It's just one of those things, and it's accepting that and being vulnerable enough to say that and say that, look, yeah, it didn't work, but we made a decision, and we're really happy with the decision we made, and that's a decision that's right for us. And I think quite often people are worried about talking to other people because they're worried what people will think. And I think it's really important to make clear that you've made that decision. You're not looking for opinions. This is your family, this is your family story, and this is how you can support our family story. And we're telling you now so that if Mila, Esker or Lena bring it up in the future, they're not met with a blank face, but you can talk to them about it and encourage them and be part of it, really.
Yeah, and it's not a decision you've made lightly. You've gone through so much process to get to that point that no one else has a right to kind of put their opinions on you about it, because they're not in your situation. And like you said, there shouldn't be so much shame around even going through IVF, any point of this, because it's a medical thing, but yet we all keep it quiet. I kept it quiet until we'd been through it. I didn't tell many people, and I think there's so many who are the same, and so many who have had children through IVF who still haven't. Nobody knows that they haven't gone through. And the more we talk about it and the more we educate people, the easier it is for them to understand, to then be able to support people going through it, but also children as well, who may need it in the future, or whose stories, are based on that as well. Which is why it's great now with what you're doing as well. So you now support people who are going through it, because there is a huge need still for more support for people who are going through, or who are looking at donor conception as a path to parenthood. So do you want to talk through what it is you're doing now and how you're supporting people?
Yeah, so everything started, was it 2 years ago now, when I launched Defining Mum. And like you said earlier, it was all about defining what it meant to be a mum. And that's kind of the story I wanted to tell, how I came to that decision and how I feel now. And yeah, I didn't think it would really take off in the way that it has, but the response has been incredible. And I think it's just people going, really kind of resonating with my story, or really finding hope in it, that has kind of made it grow so much. And so I've shared a lot around fertility, around how best to support, and then I've moved on to donor conception, both pre-making the decision right through to parenting, because it is a real journey, and I'm still on that journey now. So I try and share things like certain conversations I've had with the girls, and where and how that's made me feel, and how I may have answered certain questions and things, just to try and kind of, it also helps me process. It's almost a bit like therapy for me, but to help other people kind of feel less alone in it. And I got to a point where I thought, let's try and bring some people together. So I'd organised an event for earlier this year, but obviously COVID hit and that had to be cancelled. And actually, it's probably one of the best things that's happened, because it allowed me the time during lockdown to really start thinking about how I can reach more people. And I've kind of built a network of different experts and people who I've spoken to, all about things from the emotional side of donor conception to research that's gone into people who are donor conceived, and real best practice for people who are now parenting. And so I wanted to kind of bring it all together, which is where I created Paths to Parent Hub. And my main aim was to provide support to people at whatever stage of the journey, to provide information that they may need to make those decisions, and to kind of think about how they parent, and also to provide connection. And that's one of the big things I really believe in, the power of sharing, the power of speaking to somebody else. And so Paths to Parent Hub has a number of different kind of facets to it. There's the information side. So I hold regular monthly webinars with an expert on a different topic. So we've covered things like epigenetics, we've covered talking to your child, grieving the loss of an old dream and redefining that new dream. And each month there's a different expert or someone sharing their personal experience as well. And there's also a monthly live chat. So that's with people who have been through the journey. So you can ask questions and really interact with them. So we've covered donor sperm, we've covered donor eggs, we're covering solo motherhood this week. And then there's also the connection site, which is it's through an app. So people can connect with each other away from social media. So recognizing that quite often people go through this journey and want privacy, want to be able to express themselves without worrying about who's looking at what I'm posting. So this is a specific members only app, and they can chat with each other privately there's a kind of, it's a bit like a Facebook group, but it's private and it's on a separate app.
Yeah.
And we're also going to be holding monthly support groups within that as well. So there's going to be where we all get together. There's going to be a month where we look at those who are still trying to conceive, and then there's going to be a separate group for people who are parenting or pregnant. So it's trying to cover all of those different things that I really needed back then. And I was trying to think about kind of what I felt I needed. And my next step is hoping that fertility clinics will recognise this as a resource and start to offer it to their patients, where even at the points where they're waiting for treatment or they're waiting for a donor match, or they can connect with other people. And it's just having that, if I'd have been able to find someone where I was going through that stage where I felt so distant when I was going through the donor cycle, and said to them, did you feel like this? And then go, yeah, I really did. And this is how I help. That would have made such a difference for me. And that's what I really want to do for people, to support them during that process. And things like just having conversations with family members and just having a resource to say to them, look, this is what we're going through. I don't really know how to find the words, but if you read this story, this kind of brings it to life. And I know a lot of people use Defining Mum for that, or they kind of want to talk to their husbands and they use a post that I've used to start a conversation. And it's just about that, starting those conversations and looking at all those things that aren't usually talked about. So yeah, and it's been amazing. It's been 2 months now since I launched, and we've already got lots of members, and it's a lovely community. And yeah, I just feel really grateful for having that opportunity to then like kind of use something in my past experience to now feel like I'm helping others, and try and make that experience better for them, but also then make sure that people are better informed to make these decisions, and then to support their children as they move forward. And my hope is, and this is what I said right at the very beginning, that when the girls are kind of 18, that donor conception is something that is widely known, it's accepted, it's just another way to parenthood, it's another way of being created, and they don't feel any feelings of shame or needing to hide it, or they can talk proudly about it, and that's what I hope will change over the next sort of 15 years or so.
And I think we are moving towards, I think, even over since we first started our treatment, and I think there's so much has moved on. There's still not enough, but I mean, what you're doing is making a great step forward in doing that, isn't it? And I think it's great because what you've created is based on your experience and exactly what you needed while you were going through treatment. And I think when we're supporting those going through these things, when we've got the experience yourself, you know exactly what it feels like, and you don't judge, you just know what people are likely to need, and the information they need, and the support they need as well, just to be able to say, it's okay, we all feel like that, it's normal. Because I was exactly the same. It was only sort of after coming through sort of IVF that I spoke to people, other people about it, and others who'd gone through it, and we both kind of said, I wish I'd known you when we were going through treatment, because I wish I'd known that feeling I was having when I thought I was going mad. I wish I'd known that was normal, because I'd have been a lot kinder on myself. I was thinking there was something wrong with me for thinking that. And I think it's that validation, isn't it, of feelings is so important. And that's why I think support groups and Instagram accounts where you can follow people who are going through it are so important for validating how you're feeling, so that you know you're not on your own and there's support out there for you, which is brilliant. We've covered so much stuff in there. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I mean, the key things for me are kind of doing your research, getting support is vital. Find your tribe of people who are there and understand. But just all of those things combined just help you make those informed decisions, don't they? And then advocating for yourself. Is there any other advice you know, as a final thing you'd give to people?
I think you've covered everything really there. I think it's just recognising those pinpoints in the process of donor conception that can cause heightened emotions and feelings of loss of control, and just recognising why you might be feeling that way, and that it's totally normal and it's not you. And I think, like you said, I used to feel like I was totally overreacting. I had someone who I worked with who was not very sympathetic and used to make me feel like I was really kind of overreacting and playing a victim almost. And it was huge, and the impact on my mental health was massive. It's the biggest thing I feel like I've ever been through. And I think it can be underestimated by people who haven't been there. And like, that's what I say, find your tribe, find those people that are going to validate you and get it. And I think it's just recognizing that all of those emotions, whether it be the excitement, the fear, the hope, the envy, all of those, they're all perfectly normal. You're human, and it's a big process, a big decision, but one that can be absolutely amazing on the other side. And that's one of the things I always like to show, the kind of the hope and the joy and that it can bring. So but it is so much for raising this topic, because it's just so important. And you've actually given me lots of ideas for posts over the next week, just talking about control and donor conception. So thank you.
And like you say, it's great that you're showing the other side as well, because it's such an unknown. And you know, if people are seeing it as a backup option, because you know, ultimately people, you know, as an ideal, no one would want to go through IVF as an ideal, you know, but then those of us that do would love it to be with their own eggs, their own sperm. But it's not, you know, yes, it is a backup option, but it's not a negative backup option. It can be just as amazing as using your own. And I think it's so important to show that side, because then it doesn't take away, because everybody would still feel that, but it shows that it's not something to worry about, that it actually is a really positive option for giving you a family. So I think it's really important to show that side of things as well, which is great.
I think so often we can focus on what we're losing when it comes to losing our genetics, and it's trying to sometimes kind of the biggest switch for me was trying to think about what I would gain. And I would still get to do all of these things that I've wanted to do as a mother, and I'd still get to influence them through nurture and that. So I am the mum. I am the real mum. It is an actual process that allows you to be a mum or a dad. And it's just allowing yourself to kind of flip that narrative a little bit and think about the positive things that will come out of it. And obviously you do need to work through those things where you feel grief for things that you're losing, but it doesn't have to mean that you never have your family. So
thank you so much. So people can find you at Defining Mum on Instagram. There's details of the Path to Parent Hub on there, and then have you got a website for Path to Parent Hub as well?
Yeah, it's www.pathstoparenthub.com, but you can find the link through Defining Mum as well. So when
I put this on my website as well as a blog, I'll put the link to pass to Parent Hub as well for you, so that everybody can find it if they're interested. But thank you so much. It's been so interesting for me as well, and so much helpful information there. As always, it's lovely to chat to you.
And you. I love what you're doing, Sarah. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and I will speak to you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.